本日は大変多くの受講希望。
There are so many people who wish to participate today, so we would like to ask you to kindly disperse yourselves from the front rows in the room. Thank you.
本日はお忙しい中、
Thank you very much for being with us out of your very busy schedules. We now would like to start the 5th International Forum for Sustainable Asia and the Pacific, ISAP 2013. Paving the way for sustainable Asia Pacific. I will be your MC today. I am with ISAP Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, Haruko Kuramasu. Very good to be here. In opening the session, I would like to ask the organizer to extend his greetings. First, Chair of the Board of Directors of ISAP, Hironori Hamanaka. Mr. Hamanaka, please.
Thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Hamanaka. I'm the chair of the board of directors for ISAP. Mr. Yatsu, the vice minister, the vice governor of Kanagawa Prefectural Government, Mr. Yoshikawa, the Dr. Govinda Parayal, the director of the UNU-IAS. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great pleasure to be able to co-host with the UNU-IAS the ISAP 2013 International Forum for Sustainable Asia and the Pacific. On behalf of ISAP, I am pleased to say a few words at the outset. First of all, I would like to express my sincere appreciation for the distinguished guests, keynote speakers, as well as panelists and discussants. I would like to thank each and every one of you for participating with the ISAP. I would also like to thank UNEP, as well as UNSCAP, as well as the ADB, the Asian Development Bank, for your very kind support and cooperation for the holding of the ISAP. Also, we have been given support from the Ministry of Environment, Kanagawa Prefectural Government, Hyogo Prefectural Government, Yokohama Municipal Government, Kawasaki Municipal Government, as well as Kitakyushu Municipal Governments, and all the other groups and institutions. I would like to thank all of you for your cooperation, especially for the exhibitions. ISAP have been aiming to realize sustainable development in Asia Pacific, have been engaged in practical and innovative policy research to provide policy recommendation which is effective based upon the result of our research. Our mission is to reflect the result of our research into the actual policy making. At the forum at this time, we hope to have a very good discussion on important issues to do with environment policies facing the Asia Pacific, to share the knowledge and information with many people, including experts, the relevant institutions, as well as the industries, to contribute to the innovative policy making. The theme for the ISAP at this time is paving the way for sustainable Asia-Pacific regional perspectives on the green economy. We see dramatic economic growth continuing in the Asia-Pacific. The livelihood of the people have been improving, relatively speaking, but on the other hand, we see an unsustainable trend continuing with the reduction as well as deterioration of the natural resources, including forests, as well as increase in the greenhouse gas emissions. And many people are still suffering with the poverty and not having sufficient access to modern energy, as well as safe the water and the hygiene and other services. To try to strike a good balance between sustainable environment, society, and economy in trying to look for the new ways of the affluent life. To move away from the growth model, which was based upon the heavy industries, which is burdensome on environment, pursuing only the material, the affluence. We see a urgent the challenge ahead for us to try to create a green economy, the centering upon the welfare as well as the reduced resources and the low carbon. At the Asia Pacific, we are trying to promote low carbon cities as being promoted by the municipalities as well as the business activities, which is placing emphasis on sustainability. And through the Satoyama initiative, we are trying to create a more resilient society at the regional level, resilient to the disasters, and try to promote the green economy to be created. We would like to focus upon these activities for the 2 days at the ISAP to try to transmit the message to the whole world for the pathway towards sustainable growth from the various stakeholders the viewpoint. We will have the meetings of the LCSR net as well as the local net. LCSR net is the global wide the network for research institutions promoting low carbon society the research, and the local net is aiming to share the knowledge and also capacity the building for policy the making for the low carbon the growth. We have annual meetings for these the networks. Both have been established with Japan taking the initiative to try to share the knowledge on low carbon the growth. LCSR.net and ISAP will be the co-hosting the knowledge-sharing networks towards realizing low-carbon societies, which is the second plenary session today. And tomorrow, there will be this parallel session, which will be co-hosted by LocalNet with the theme of structuring a new climate regime toward the 2-degree target. With these two important networks playing a very important role, and that I just to support these the networks for the management of the institutions. I hope that through ISAP we will be able to have a deepening of the debate as well as to broaden the human network. For the reduction as well as the deterioration of natural resources and climate change, it is increasingly important to send a message from the Asia Pacific in realizing sustainable growth with a low carbon and the lower resources input. IGES will be celebrating 15th anniversary this year. We have just launched the 6th integrated strategic research program. At the ISAP, I just hope to play a role of change agent to encourage the shift to more resilient society, which is based upon low carbon as well as a reduced use of resources. We hope to promote a strategic policy research and to have the timely policy message to the whole of the world, including Asia. Although the time is limited, I hope that you will be able to have very active discussion at the various sessions and to able to create the network with the various experts. At the students' poster session, we will be having awarded ceremony for the excellent posters. I would like to ask your kind support for this. With your kind cooperation, I hope that the ISAP will be truly fruitful and useful for all of you. I would like to thank all of you once again, and thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Hamanaka. The next, Dr. Godin van Parel, Director of United Nations University Institute of Advanced Studies, will give an opening welcome remarks.
Professor Hamanaka, Chair of the Board of IGES and member of the United Nations University Institute of Advanced Studies International Advisory Board. Vice Minister Dr. Yatsu from the Ministry of the Environment, Japan. Vice Governor of Kanagawa Prefecture, Dr. Yoshikawa. Distinguished guests and participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the United Nations University Institute of Advanced Studies, I am pleased to welcome all of you to the 5th International Forum for Sustainable Asia and the Pacific. This is the third year that our institute has co-hosted this important forum together with the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. And it is a pleasure to see that this year's forum has again attracted such a diverse range of distinguished speakers, participants, and other guests. Taking this opportunity, I would like to extend special thanks to all of the collaborating and supporting organizations that have contributed to making ISAP 2013 possible. As we all know, the world is rapidly changing, and some of the most striking trends are particularly visible here in the Asia-Pacific region. Unprecedented rates of rural to urban migration, rapid demographic shifts, and lifestyle changes are all contributing to reshaping countries across the region in a variety of different ways. And while the Asia-Pacific region is seen as a center of growth for the global economy, this growth comes hand in hand with a range of concerns about sustainability, income inequality, resource use inefficiency, and carbon emissions. Asia is home to one of the greatest concentrations of wealth created due to extremely rapid growth in many parts of the world, especially in China. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, and yet Asia is also home to some of the largest concentrations of extremely poor people, who are mostly concentrated in the South Asian region. Asia is also the most climate vulnerable regions in the world. With its regional focus, ISAP is particularly well positioned as a forum for contributing to the global discourse on sustainable development and the transition from a brown economy to a green economy. Indeed, the overall theme for this year's forum is Paving the Way for a Sustainable Asia-Pacific, Regional Perspectives on Green Economy. I'm very pleased to note that several sessions today and tomorrow will be looking at bringing the green economy away from the realms of theoretical discussion and focusing on practical aspects of local-level action and implementation. The theme of this year's ISAP is also very much in line with the mission of UNU-IAS, namely, to advance knowledge and promote learning for policymaking to meet the challenges of sustainable development. By bringing together participants and speakers from the public and private sector, as well as the academic and research community, ISAP is poised to feed into policy processes in a substantial manner. In conclusion, I would like to extend our sincere thanks to all of the organizations and their staff who have contributed to realizing this forum in a smooth manner. Finally, I wish you fruitful and dynamic discussions over the course of the next 2 days and hope that we will all leave this forum with a deeper insight into the path forward towards a sustainable Asia-Pacific. Thank you very much, and once again, welcome to ISAP 2013. Thank you.
パライル所長、どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. Next, we'd like to invite guest remarks.
May I ask the Vice Minister of Ministry of Environment, Mr. Yatsu, to give his address.
Hamanaka Hironori.
Mr. Hamanaka, Dr. Govindam Parallel, the Vice Governor Yoshikawa, Dr. Pachori, Dr. Lohani, the Vice President of ADB, as well as many good friends and participants. Good morning. As has been kindly introduced, my name is Yatsu. I'm the Vice Minister of Ministry of Environment of Japan. the ISAP 2013 International Forum for Sustainable Asia and the Pacific, on behalf of the Ministry of Environment, I am pleased to say a few words. First and foremost, I would like to express my deep respect as well as appreciation to the IGES as well as the UNU-IAS, the Institute of Advanced Studies, for holding this forum, and every year there has been expanding this forum as a place to congregate all the top-class experts and wisdom from all over the world. Climate change countermeasures is something of an urgent issue in order to realize sustainable Asia-Pacific. The global average temperature is steadily rising. According to the WMO report for the decade, starting from 2001, ending in 2010, was said to have been the hottest decade ever in the observation the history of the world. Asia-Pacific has indeed a vast expanse of the regions, starting with the vulnerable island nations, as well as the district with very low altitude, also vulnerable to the climate change. At the end of last month, we had the honor of having Dr. Pachauri, Director General of and Chair of the IPCC, participating in the International Conference on Climate Change and Coral Reef Conservation held in Okinawa. Japan is placed in a very difficult situation because of the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami, as well as the accident of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. But we are making all-out efforts nonetheless in trying to save energy as well as reduce energy, thereby introducing in an enormous amount the renewable energy. In particular, we have introduced the feed-in tariff for the system for the renewables in July last year. And for photovoltaics, it is said that Japan may be the largest market in the world this year. For international contribution, we have been leading the world in the many ways. In the Asia-Pacific, this is the growth center of the world, and in the countries where we see dramatic growth, rather than seeing a conventional the growth of placing priority on economic growth, they should jump forward to create low-carbon society. It is indeed necessary to expand investment into global warming countermeasures, which is directly leading to green growth. Japan is actively supporting the developing economies. And the joint crediting mechanism, we have for the first time have signed a bilateral agreement with Mongolia and started the system itself. And then we also signed the agreement with Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Maldives. And on the 2nd of July this year, we were able to sign the agreement with Vietnam. We would like to utilize the system to provide all-out support for the developing economies, especially for their global warming countermeasures. 2 years ago at COP17, the Durban had the platform, or the special the working group that was established, and the negotiation is ongoing in trying to create the new legal framework for the 2020 onwards under the UNFCCC to be adopted by the year 2015. And Japan, towards the COP19 to be held in November, we would like to make all-out contribution to create the framework which is effective as well as fair, and with all the countries participating. The theme for ISAP this year is Paving the Way for Sustainable Asia-Pacific, Regional Perspectives on the Green Economy. The green economy would lead to investment as well as employment to be increased by the state as well as the businesses. In order to realize the outcome of the Rio Plus 20, we need to further deepen international debate. For sustainable growth, it is crucial to try to share the knowledge as well as scientific findings. Minister of Environment at the G8 Environment Ministers meeting, which was held in Kobe in 2008, we have proposed to create a network to contribute to promote research in creating low-carbon society. And in the following year, the LCSR net was established. And I understand that LCSR net will have its annual meeting back-to-back with the ISAP meeting. And also the annual meeting of the Low-Carbon Net, which is a network to promote research for low carbon in the Asia, will also be held. In order to cope with climate change, not only mitigation measures trying to suppress the emissions of the greenhouse gases, but it is also important to have adaptation measures to try to minimize the impact on the nature as well as the human society coming from the climate change. As I have mentioned at the outset, Asia-Pacific is especially vulnerable region for climate change. Thus, adaptation is something vital. And Ministry of Environment is placing an emphasis on climate change adaptation endeavors. From 2009, we have been supporting the APAN under the Global Adaptation Network as advocated by the UNEP. On the 2nd of July, in order to establish for our own country the adaptation the measures, we have established a forum for debate under the Central Environmental Council to try to formulate adaptation program for Japan for the coming 2 years. At the ISAP, we hope to share the experience as well as the policy, the knowledge, and the scientific findings, and try to further promote the green economy for Asia-Pacific. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We would now like to invite guest remarks from Mr. Shinji Yoshikawa, Vice Governor of Kanagawa Prefectural Government. Mr. Yoshikawa, please. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your kind introduction. My name is Yoshikawa, the Vice Governor of the Kanagawa Prefectural Government. I would like to offer my congratulations for the holding of the 5th International Forum for Sustainable Asia and the Pacific, or ISAP 2013, with guests and experts from around the world, such as Asia-Pacific and the United States, gathered in such large numbers. I understand that this is the 5th forum. And we are indeed honored and privileged that, as was the past, Kanagawa, Yokohama City has the privilege of hosting this forum once again. Also, on behalf of the 9 million residents of Kanagawa Prefecture, I would like to offer my sincere welcome to our guests from abroad. Kanagawa Prefecture, back in 1992, took part in the UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro, the so-called Earth Summit, as a local government. Based on the results of that conference, the first ever local agenda in Japan, Agenda 21 Kanagawa, was adopted. And to promote this, the Kanagawa Global Environment Preservation Promotion Conference, constituted by the citizens, companies, NPOs, and the government, was formed. We asked the chairman of the board of directors of IJUS, the host of today's forum, Mr. Hamanaka, to serve as the chairman of the promotion conference. And we're endeavoring to pursue community-based environmental preservation measures. As you are aware, ISAP is an international research organization that is significantly contributing through its practical and innovative research to improve the environment on a global scale, especially in Asia-Pacific, where there is remarkable population and economic growth. And as the hosting local government, we hope that it will continue to play a critical role in the promotion of international research in environment. Now, allow me to take a moment to advertise a little bit the initiatives which are being pursued by the Kanagawa prefectural government. The first is, and by the way, 2 years ago, Mr. Kurewa became the governor of Kanagawa prefectural government, and the first initiative which adopted was this Kanagawa Smart Energy Initiative. It's been more than 2 years since the Great East Japan earthquake, as well as the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant incident. However, a power supply demand situation in Japan and securing energy security remains a critical challenge, even at this point. So Kanagawa prefectural government, based on the three principles of not being excessively reliant on nuclear power, giving consideration to the environment, and to promote local production and local consumption, in order to pursue new energy policies over the medium to long term, we compiled the Kanagawa Smart Energy Initiative. Under this initiative, by introducing renewable energy such as photovoltaics, we are focused on three elements, namely energy creation sector to expand power supply, energy saving sector to cut peak electricity, and energy storage sector to achieve peak shift. By comprehensively taking three initiatives, we are to realize efficient energy supply demand situation to spread and penetrate photovoltaics. The government and the suppliers are working in the Kanagawa Solar Bank system, where we are able to offer solar panels at a reasonable price. We also pursue photovoltaic power generation based on rooftop leasing of prefectural government affiliated facilities. We really want to create energy revolution here from Kanagawa. Second initiative. Today, we would like to pursue various international exchanges in different areas. One such effort involves Kanagawa International Fan Club. Well, we have many exchange students who study here in Kanagawa. Some of them work in Kanagawa. So for those foreigners who are affiliated with Kanagawa, we want to communicate the information about attractions of Kanagawa. And in order to facilitate exchange, in May of 2012, we established the Kanagawa International Fan Club, where we have now 1,400 members from 63 different countries. Through such initiatives, we hope that the foreigners who work in global companies and institutions will become enthusiasts of Kanagawa, will become fans of Kanagawa Prefecture. And through such efforts, we hope that they will eventually become supporters of Kanagawa Prefecture. In this forum's exhibition booth, you will find information about Kanagawa International Fan Club. We hope that you will stop by at the booth. Now, today we have many guests from abroad in this forum. Now, Kanagawa Prefecture offers the city of Yokohama, an international port town, the city of Kamakura, the home of the samurais, and Hakone, internationally renowned hot springs. We have much tourist sites and products to offer. We hope that you will take this opportunity to travel a little bit around Kanagawa Prefecture and thoroughly enjoy the attractions of Kanagawa and become fans of Kanagawa Prefecture. In the forum today, I'm sure that various exchanges of views and discussions will be held in different areas from different perspectives, and I'm sure that there will be many networks that will be created amongst you. With this forum, I hope that international debate on sustainable Asia-Pacific and development thereof will progress even further. Last but not least, this ISAP, which has become a regular event, we sincerely hope that this will continue to be hosted here in Kanagawa Prefecture, and that this will continue to play a critical role as an international forum to aim for sustainable Asia-Pacific going forward. And I would like to wish for the success of ISAP and to all the participants here today. And with this, I would like to conclude my remarks. Thank you very much.
Vice Governor Yoshikawa, thank you very much. With this, we would like to conclude the opening session. Now we would like to move on to plenary session 1. During the preparation for the stage, please wait for a while. Thank you.
ステージの準備が整いましたので、全体
Now, we have all finished the preparation. We would like to start plenary session 1, Green Economy Perspectives from the Asia Pacific. The moderator for this session is a journalist, Ms. Charmin Korda. Ms. Korda, please. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I have the pleasure of serving as a moderator in this session. My name is Charmin Korda. Very good to be here. As you already know, in this session, there are speakers from overseas as well. So allow me to use both Japanese and English, but mainly I'd like to speak English. We have been informed that there are excellent interpreters, simultaneous interpreters available. I'd like to ask for your kind understanding.
Everyone, and welcome to Plenary 1. It is the aim of this kickoff session to focus on green economy and its implications for the realization of sustainable development in Asia Pacific. Green economy as policy measures has been in the international discussions among experts of environmental economists for some time now. At the first Rio Summit of 1992, the concept of sustainable development as the guiding principle for the way forward for society made its spread to the world. And landmark documents such as the Rio Declaration, Agenda 21, included green economy policy measures, although they may not have been called that way at that time. According to the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the term green economy first appeared in the late 1980s as a title of a report Now, it seems that there was no mention of green economy in the report itself, apart from the title at that time. The term green economy gained wide international public attention rather recently in 2007, 2008, during the multiple global financial, energy, food crisis, as you may remember. And large-scale public investments in the green sectors were advocated, such as the global Green New Deal, to spur green economy, increase employment, and at the same time eradicate poverty, reduce both carbon emissions and ecosystem degradation. Green economy, as you know, in the context of sustainable development and poverty eradication, was also taken up as one of the themes of Rio Plus 20 last year, and heightened international attention and led to the production of numerous studies and analyses on the various aspects of green economy, including its definition, guiding principles, risks, benefits, emerging experiences, and many others. And concerns were raised by developing countries, such as possible trade protectionisms, conditionalities, new conditionalities on financial aid, and the failure to incorporate inclusive aspects of the social development, such as well-being and social equity. Nevertheless, countries did agree that green economy in the context of sustainable development and poverty eradication is an important tool to achieve sustainable development. Asia-Pacific is the center of global growth, but there are still many people living in poverty, and it is becoming clear that we cannot continue the depletion and destruction of the environment to remain sustainable and to sustain our well-being. We are very honored today to have as our speakers very eminent, distinguished guests from the research world, the business world, and international organizations. We will have 2 keynote speeches and 2 discussants presentations. I wish to first quickly introduce our guests, our speakers, before I invite the speakers to make their presentations. Our first keynote speaker is Dr. Rajendra Pachauri, who has flown straight in from the airport this morning and joining us. And he is, as we all know, is the chair of the Nobel Peace Prize winning IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And Dr. Pachauri is also Director General of TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute, a major research organization doing highly respected work in various parts of the environment. And by the way, his office has a reputation also here in Japan. And our next keynote speaker is Mr. Masamitsu Sakurai, the executive advisor of RICO Company. Mr. Sakurai is undoubtedly one of Japan's most well-known and respected business leaders, a pioneer of environmental management. Mr. Sakurai was president and chairman of RICO and the former chair of the Japan Association of Corporate Executives. Next, I wish to introduce our distinguished discussants. First is Mr. Raekwon Chon, Director, Environment and Development Division, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, UNESCAP. Mr. Chon is noted for his deep involvement and contribution for both climate change and green growth, formerly as Korea's climate change ambassador, leading his country's negotiation, and through his leadership on green growth in the UN organization. Our second discussant is Ms. Tomoko Nishimoto, Director, Division of Regional Cooperation of UNEP, United Nations Environment Program. Ms. Nishimoto is responsible for overseeing its 6 regional offices, one of which is the Asia and the Pacific. Ms. Nishimoto has direct experience in sustainable development work, having served in 7 countries in senior posts in UNDP and UNICEF. After the presentations, we look forward to taking some time for Q&A with some members of the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish now to invite Dr. Rajendra Pachauri to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Charmaine. It's a great pleasure to be here among friends and to be part of this extremely important event, which has now become a landmark on the calendar of important meetings in the Asia-Pacific region. I'm basically going to talk about a green economy and its relevance to climate change, and of course, the relevance of climate change to a green economy. In my view, there are 3 aspects that perhaps interplay with the whole issue of a green economy. The first is the concept of sustainable development. I don't think an economy can be called green if the pattern of growth that's being pursued is not sustainable. Secondly, I think a green economy has to use resources efficiently. And therefore, if you have inefficient use of resources, below optimal levels, below benchmarks and technologies that essentially would ensure efficient use of resources, then that economy is not green. And finally, I think a green economy also has to protect ecosystems, the environment, natural resources, and as you rightly mentioned, if there is depletion and degradation of the environment and ecosystems, then clearly we are deviating from the concept of a green economy. Now, all of this, incidentally, has direct linkages with climate change, its impacts, and the means by which we might be able to meet the challenge of climate change. So let me move on with this presentation. The most important point that I'd like to put across is something that was stated clearly in very simple but effective ways, that climate change is unequivocal. And there is now growing evidence on the basis of observations on various aspects of the impacts of climate change. And I'm going to deal with some of them as I move on. But first, let's look at the geological perspective. And that tells us very clearly that 125,000 years ago, the polar regions were significantly warmer than present for an extended period, which led to reductions in polar ice volume and sea level rise of 4 to 6 meters. So therefore, we need to keep in mind what it is that we are doing as a human society to something that essentially represented a very stable form of climate for a long period of time. And paleoclimatic information supports the interpretation that the warmth of the last half-century is unusual, at least the previous 1,300 years. I might also mention that we have stated very clearly in the 4th assessment report of the IPCC that most of the warming that has taken place since the middle of the last century is very likely on account of an increase in anthropogenic, that means human-induced concentration of greenhouse gases. Now, when we use the term very likely, we are assigning a probability of 90% or more. Just to give you a quick overview of what's happened since the beginning of industrialization, excuse me, you would observe that the temperature, global average temperature, has fluctuated over a period of time. And this, of course, is the result of natural as well as human-induced climate change. However, what's particularly relevant is that if you look at the last 50 or 60 years, the trend is clearly upwards. So if we look at the extent of warming in the last century, the average increase was about 0.74 degrees Celsius. The second picture gives you sea level rise, which is the result of melting of bodies of ice across the globe, as well as thermal expansion of the oceans. And here, during the last century, we had an average increase in sea level of about 17 centimeters. Now, this may not seem like a lot, but of course, we're all here in Japan, an island nation. And if you go to other parts of the world which have low-lying coastal areas or small island states, then clearly 17 centimeters is a substantial increase. I recall very clearly that it was in 1997 we held the plenary session of the IPCC in the Maldives Islands, and the then president of the Maldives, Mr. Gayoom, told us, ladies and gentlemen, the place where you're holding your meeting 7 years ago or 8 years ago was under about 1.5 feet of water. So I think the point to remember is that there will be storm surges, there will be weather events, and if the sea level is higher, then to that extent, the damage that would take place and the risks that it poses would be significantly higher. And the third graph over here gives you Northern Hemisphere snow cover. The largest land area on this planet is in the Northern Hemisphere. And if you look at the snow cover that was existing, let's say, at the beginning of industrialization, and of course, in this case, we see the period when we started taking readings of snow cover. You find that, let's say, in the last 75 years or so, there's been a significant reduction, as is depicted over here. Now, if we look at the projections for increase in temperature in the future, the fourth assessment report indicated that we, based on certain plausible scenarios, we would see warming of 1.1 degrees Celsius to 6.4 degrees Celsius. However, to be able to focus on what might be a relevant figure to look at in terms of initiatives that we take, measures that we adopt for meeting the challenge of climate change, we came up with a best estimate of 1.8 degrees Celsius at the lower end and 4 degrees Celsius at the upper end. So we have to look at this also in the context of what has already happened. If we go back to the figure that I mentioned, as temperature increased during the 20th century, it was 0.74 degrees Celsius. So you can see where we are heading if these projections were to materialize, both at the best estimate at the lower end as well as the one at the upper end. Now, we need to understand the causes of climate change, and here may I say that since 1970, there's been a significant increase in the emissions of greenhouse gases. Between 70 and 2004, as we brought out in the fourth assessment report, there's been an increase of 70%. And CO2 annual emissions grew by about 80% in the same period. And here I repeat what I've already said. Most of the observed increase in temperature since the mid-20th century is very likely due to the increase in anthropogenic greenhouse gas concentrations. Now, there are some important implications. Today, we know across the world, urban dwellers constitute more than 50% of the total population of the Earth. And urbanization is increasing very rapidly, with the fastest rates currently taking place in the least developed countries. And urban developments contribute to our climate change, as they are major emitters of greenhouse gas emissions and cause changes in land use, which is not to say that you don't have other sources of emissions. Agriculture is a significant source of emissions. So is deforestation and land use changes. And climate change, may I mention, exacerbates other stresses on urban settlements. urban settlements, you have problems like the heat island effect. You have large numbers of people living under very unhealthy conditions in slums. And in the developing world in particular, you see population increase in urban areas, also accompanied by a large increase in the slum population. So there are clearly a number of stresses that exist in urban habitat, and those are exacerbated by climate change. Now, these stresses can be serious enough that any significant additional stress could be the trigger of undesirable outcomes. So we need to keep that in mind. And, you know, quite apart from the physical effects and impacts of climate change, there are important social, undoubtedly economic implications that we need to keep in mind. Projected impacts on water resources can be serious, and it's been assessed that countries like Bangladesh, China, and India are susceptible to increasing salinity of their groundwater and surface water resources due to increases in sea level. With an increase in sea level, the intrusion of salinity goes further onshore, and that clearly has a major impact on groundwater resources, which are used on an extensive scale in several parts of the world. And in India, it was projected that gross per capita water availability will decline from 1820 cubic meters per year in 2001 to 1140 cubic meters per year in 2050. So in other words, there would be a reduction of about 1/3 in the availability of water per capita in India in a short period of 50 years. Also, as a result of rapid melting of glaciers, glacial runoff and frequency of glacial lake outbursts causing mud flows and avalanches have increased. And I've seen some of this in Nepal, where this is quite a frequent occurrence. However, there's a substantial amount of information available on the frequency of these events, which are on the increase. Africa, may I mention, is one of the most vulnerable continents because of the range of projected impacts, the multiple stresses, and low adaptive capacity. Now, of course, human society has adapted to weather and climate changes for a long period of time, but undoubtedly this takes a substantial amount of resources, institutional capability, and measures that often are missing in the case of developing countries. I was in Guyana in the Caribbean just 10 days ago, and there's about a 160-kilometer stretch of land which is below sea level, and all they have is a very simple wall that sort of keeps the sea out most times, but whenever you have high tide and an extreme event, then the water just flows over. On the other hand, if you look at the Netherlands, they are rather well equipped. They are also strengthening and raising their dikes. So the point I'm trying to make is often the kind of infrastructure that would be required for adaptation measures is quite capital intensive and very difficult for developing countries to be able to mobilize. Now, regions in the weakest, substantial risks due to sea level rise are projected particularly for Asian megadeltas and for small island communities. And which are these Asian megadeltas? Cities like Shanghai, Dhaka, Kolkata. These are cities which have a large concentration of population, and they are essentially in relatively low-lying areas situated on the deltas of major rivers. So every time you have coastal flooding or a storm surge or some other weather-related event, then clearly a large number of people would be vulnerable and would therefore be affected. Now, the vulnerability of coastal zones is particularly relevant when we're talking about what to do to deal with the challenge of climate change. Coastal population could grow from 1.2 billion in 1990 to 1.8 to 5.2 billion by 2080s. And historically, if you look at some of the largest settlements across the world, they have been close to the sea. simply because you had access to resources, you had access to transportation, and this trend is certainly going to be much stronger in the future, and therefore there would be a large number of people who would be living in coastal areas. And 60% of the world's metropolises with a population over 5 million are located within 100 kilometers of the coast, including 12 with populations greater than 10 million. And Asian mega deltas especially are key societal hotspots of coastal vulnerability. Now, without adaptation, over 100 million people will be flooded annually above a 40-centimeter sea level rise for all the scenarios that the IPCC has used in the 4th assessment report and the 3rd assessment report. Asia, incidentally, dominates the global exposure to flooding by storm surge with its large coastal population, which is not to say that other parts of the world are not going to be affected, but clearly the largest numbers happen to be in Asia. And therefore, since we are focusing on the Asia-Pacific region, this is an important consideration to keep in mind. This is just a picture of the vulnerability of coastal deltas, and you see the red spots over there. These are by far the most vulnerable locations. The yellow ones are somewhat lower, and the ones in black are medium. I also want to highlight the fact that the IPCC brought out a special report on extreme events and disasters. And in that, we mentioned an important figure, and this, of course, is in respect of all natural disaster-related deaths, not necessarily those related to climate change. And 95% of them took place during this period, 1970 to 2008, in the developing countries. And this is easy to understand. For instance, if you have a hurricane hitting the coast of Florida, firstly, people get early warning. Secondly, they're able to board their windows, get into their pickup trucks or station wagons and drive off to a safe spot. But if you've got millions of people who are exposed to a cyclone of similar intensity in a developing country, firstly, you often have completely missing effective early warning systems. And secondly, you just don't have the transportation means or, for that matter, other resources by which people might be able to move to shelters. I know for a fact, I can give you examples of where in South Asia there have been very intense cyclones. And people, even when they were warned about what was coming, they were not able to get away to safe locations because there just weren't shelters that they could get to. Now, of course, several governments in the region have started creating some of these shelters, and often they even mobilize the use of schools and other buildings where people can be protected when such an event takes place. Now, I want to mention an important part of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is really the central objective of this Framework Convention, which is to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. And I'm giving this only because there is clearly a correspondence between meeting this objective and attaining what one might call a green economic system. And the elaboration over here is very clear. Such a level, the level at which you would like to ensure that there's no dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system, such a level should be achieved within a time frame sufficient to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally to climate change, to ensure that food production is not threatened, and to enable economic development to proceed in a sustainable manner. So therefore, actions to deal with climate change are also essentially those that would ensure sustainable development equitably across the world. And we know that neither adaptation nor mitigation alone can avoid all climate change impacts. I could give you a figure. We have estimated in the 4th assessment report that even if, let's say, emissions were to be held at the level that was recorded in the year 2000, for 2 decades, you would have temperature increase of 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. And then it would go down to 0.1 degrees Celsius. So, in other words, there is already a certain commitment that the world, unfortunately, has been characterized by on account of an increase in concentration of greenhouse gases, and therefore it is inevitable that we have to adapt to that level of climate change. But that in itself is not enough. We also need to mitigate the emissions of greenhouse gases to see that further warming doesn't take place. Now, there's substantial potential for mitigation of global greenhouse gas emissions over the coming decades that could reduce emissions before current levels. I want to mention a paragraph from the document that came out of Rio+20 with the title, "The Future We Want." And here, there was a direct reference to disaster risk reduction, recovery and long-term development planning, and call for more coordinated and comprehensive strategies that integrate disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation considerations. So I think a green economy is not merely one that focuses on mitigation, but it also is one that protects those who would become vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and what one might call an ungreen economy. Now, it would be totally erroneous to believe that mitigation is extremely costly. In the fourth assessment report, and I'm now going to conclude with this argument, in the fourth assessment report, we clearly estimated that if you, let's say, had GDP growth without mitigation, you get the red line that's seen over here. And if you had GDP with stringent mitigation, which is shown by the blue line over here, the impact or the associated difference between these two would be that you would incur no more than 3% of the GDP of the world in that year by way of the cost. So in other words, the level of prosperity that you would reach in 2030 would at worst be delayed by a few months or a year. And you can ask yourself whether that's a very high price to pay for avoiding and minimizing some of the serious impacts of climate change. What are the mitigation options and co-benefits at the urban level in particular? Energy efficient buildings. This is a sector where there's enormous potential for reduction in emissions. Renewable energy production is another means by which we can create a greener economy. Construction density and green spaces, particularly in urban areas, public and non-motorized transport. All of these lead to a range of co-benefits, including higher energy security, a reduction in levels of pollution at the local level, which has significant health benefits, and so on. And this is just a picture of the potential in different sectors. You would observe that the largest potential exists in the building sector, which is the tallest graph that you see over here. But of course, other sectors also have significant potential for reduction in emissions. And just to wind up, I want to mention that the IPCC brought out a special report on renewable energy sources and climate change mitigation. And there are several benefits that arise out of this. And with your indulgence, I'll show you a 3-minute video at the end of something that my institute in New Delhi has launched. Renewable energy makes it possible for those who currently have no access to modern forms of energy to be able to get the benefits of the services that modern energy provides, like lighting, clean cooking, and so on. So we need to also look at the benefits of renewable energy, and they include much lower vulnerability to supply disruptions and market volatility, low risk of severe accidents, environmental and health benefits. We have estimated, for instance, on the basis of detailed round-the-clock studies and monitoring that we've carried out, that in South Asia, there are several million people who lose their lives on account of indoor air pollution because they are burning very poor quality biomass in ill-designed cook stoves. So I think all those can be eliminated. And finally, may I say that in a large number of applications, we already have renewable energy as being viable and comparable to what you would have with conventional forms of energy supply. And that's shown over here in this diagram, where you see an overlap between renewable energy costs versus those that utilize conventional forms of energy or fossil fuels. So I think this is just a quick listing of some of the core benefits of development patterns, green development and green economic growth that also take into account mitigation of emissions of greenhouse gases. And here I will turn to a projection of the little film. And I have good friends here from the UK, and I hope they wouldn't mind my quoting Mahatma Gandhi's very famous anecdote when he was once asked if he expected India to attain the same standard of living as Britain. He replied, it took Britain half the resources of the planet to achieve this prosperity. He said, how many planets would a country like India require? And here, may I make a point? I think it's critically important for developing countries to look at options for development that are rooted in the reality and the conditions that exist in those countries. It is, in my view, perhaps not the best policy to follow in terms of looking at just a single pattern of growth and development. I think it has to be suited to resource endowments, population and demographic factors at the local level. So with this, I'll stop, and if the film could be projected, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pachauri. I'm reminded of Gandhi's wisdom that he warned us already back then, the need to respect planetary boundaries. And we really do need to become more wiser. Thank you very much. In order to save time for Q&A, I'm going to move on, and I'd like to invite Mr. Masamitsu Sakurai to take the floor now. どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
Please.
Thank you for your kind introduction. My name is Sakurai from Ricoh Company. It is indeed a great honor and privilege for me to be given such an opportunity today. I'm really enjoying this forum. It just so happens that when I was part of management at Ricoh Company, the special advisor now had really very actively decided to address the global environmental issue. But for the past year and a half, I was actually not directly involved in global environmental issues. So therefore, as part of corporate management team and also as part of the Japanese industrial sector and also as part of this global industrial sector, we really should address a global warming issue. Now, today, I hope to touch upon some of these issues, but I am not speaking on behalf of the Japanese corporate management team, if you will. I'm just a member of the management team and my company, and I would like to talk about how we are addressing this environmental issue. As time is limited, I would like to go on with my presentation. If you have any questions, perhaps you can ask them during the Q&A session later on. First, what does low-carbon society entail? It goes without saying that low-carbon society, in order to realize this society, as was mentioned by Dr. Pachauri, we have to bear in mind the fact that the environment is really being degraded as we speak, and therefore, the measures to address this are to be very expensive. So therefore, it's important that we arrest the degradation as soon as possible. So that being the case, I have tried to capture some of the elements in order to realize a low-carbon society, which I believe is very important. In a nutshell, what does low-carbon society entail? I've tried to capture that on this page. Society in which the environment and development are compatible and are coexisting. That is what we mean. It is a sustainable society. Now, to achieve this, it is very important that we achieve green economy. The massive consumption, mass production, mass disposal type of society. We have condoned such a cycle up until now. With regard to global warming, I think we have created a society or economy that GHG emissions did not cost us anything. However, such a society can no longer be viable. If we want to create a low-carbon society going forward, we have to create a green economy. An economy which recognizes that there is cost in emitting GHG. That, I believe, is the key. So therefore, as I just mentioned, when it comes to the green economy, we have to make sure that everybody understands that emission entails cost. So therefore, conversely, we have to recognize the value of reducing GHG emissions when we talk about the green economy. So therefore, in order to realize this sustainable low-carbon society, and maybe I'm just talking about ideals here, but it is important that we create the green economy system. We have to shift toward a green economy system, make transition toward that. And having done that, we have to make sure that the economy recognizes the value of reducing GHG emissions. So green growth that recognizes the value of reducing GHG emissions must also be achieved. Now, if I were to go into details, it would be quite an enormous exercise. But I believe at the moment, we are not keenly feeling the urgency behind global warming. The fact that we lack the sense of urgency necessitates the fact that we need to make transition to a green economy as soon as possible. So therefore, this is an unavoidable challenge. This is a challenge which cannot be avoided any longer. It is not easy, but this unavoidable challenge of creating a low-carbon society, green economy, and green growth, we must responsibly pave the way for these goals. And turning to the next page, you will find our ideas about the essentials or essential conditions for building a low-carbon society. I have highlighted 3 such conditions. First, it is important that the people share the understanding that creating this low-carbon society is very important. If we cannot have this awareness, then our rights to existence could be taken away. That needs to be understood. It is important that people understand the sense of urgency and crisis here. Unless that is the case, we cannot creating low-carbon society which requires all participation. All our participation cannot be achieved. And people who make these efforts, we will not be able to provide value to people who make these efforts. So therefore, that being the case, sharing a sense of crisis, sharing a sense of awareness, it should be at the basis of any efforts to build low-carbon society. Second is political leadership. The leadership at the top must provide a vision, setting up policy direction toward the future. And based on that, we need to have green growth and green economy strategy. Now, this, I believe, is very important. And one thing which we cannot forget, and this, I believe, goes to the heart and the objective of my presentation today, responsible, proactive approach taken by the business sector. Now, I talked about the responsible, proactive approach by the business sector. First, if you take a look at the volume of emission by the corporate sector, this, I believe, is very clear. And this, by the way, is in relation to Japan. But based on data from Ministry of Environment, it seems that in the industrial sector, in the very broad sense, for example, power generation sector, various industrial sectors involved, transport sector is involved. So all sectors are embraced in this very broad definition provided by the Ministry of Environment. Based on this data, it seems that 80% of the emission is due to this corporate sector or the industrial sector. So total volume, out of the total volume of emission, 80% from the industrial sector, the remaining 20% from the residential sector. However, when you talk about the residential sector, you have to remember that products and services that we provide are being utilized in the household sector, in the residential sector, which lead to emission. So bearing in mind that we are responsible, it could be said that perhaps 90% of the emission derives from the industrial sector like ourselves. So we have to take responsibility for that. So the driver of building a low-carbon society must be played by the industrial sector and by the corporate sector. Now, the 3 roles by the industrial sector, the 3 tasks. First, we should only not just focus on reducing emission, our internal emission. When we provide services and products to our customers, we have to bear in mind that the products and services which develop and deliver, those also must be based on low carbon. So that's the second task that is incumbent on the corporate sector. The third is participation in infrastructure development beyond the existing business. So there must be a partnership between the industrial sector, the government sector, and the academic sector in creating this infrastructure development, and we must very actively participate in such development process. Now, the 4th element, implementation of sustainable environmental management. When we talk about low-carbon society, it must be built by all the players, inclusive of the people, as well as by the industrial sector. So we must conserve the globally available resources, and we must preserve the environment and then pave the way for growth. So preservation and growth must be realized at the same time. In the case of the corporate sector, this also must be tackled at the same time. This initiative must be deployed. So the growth of the corporate sector and the reduction of GHG must be realized at the same time. That is the corporate management that is required. This is what we mean by sustainable environmental management. So implementation of this sustainable environmental management is very important. Next, let me try to capture the current situation. Movements or initiatives towards a low-carbon society here in Japan. The efforts by the government sector is not my main topic today, so I will just very briefly go through this. But transition to green economy and also promotion of green growth, from that perspective, although on an individual basis there is progress, however, there is an overarching challenge. There is no basic law on global. There is no basic law on addressing global warming. So, there is no basic policy. There is no determination of basic policy, or there is no basic policy that have been translated into law that address this issue. So, therefore, when we talk about green economy, so therefore, we have the issue of delayed green economic policy and non-implementation of green growth strategy. The other issue relates to the Fukushima nuclear power plant, but the basic policy on energy policy must be reviewed as a result of that situation. However, this review is still not yet progressing. Then what about some of the activities on the part of the industrial sector and the corporate sector? In a nutshell, before we can talk about what the government is doing, in reality, in the global market already, so-called eco-services, eco-friendly products competition is already taking place. So there's mega competition in this global competition, which we must be victorious. That is our mission. And as I mentioned earlier, there are various energy-related issues. And there is also the growth in the emerging economy. So therefore, there is going to be tightening of supply-demand situation in the energy. So when you consider all of these issues, as far as we're concerned, there are various practical challenges for the management. So therefore, inclusive of the energy issue, we need innovation that can arrest global warming going forward. And also, when we talk about global economic management, environmental management, various companies are already pursuing this. However, there are still many challenges that need to be addressed. Some of the major issues are as follows. I talked about the green economic policy or the green growth policy on the part of the government, and also mentioned that there is lack of progress. And one of the major elements for this is that the industry and the corporate sector are taking a fairly conservative stance against the green economic policy that's being pursued by the government. That is my feeling. The reasons are as follows. When I talk about how the companies and the industrial sectors are taking a conservative stance against the green economic policy, the companies feel that there is mandatory target setting without fairness. There is a very strong opposition to that. The second reason is that the current emissions trading system may not set a proper carbon price, which leads to decline in business competitiveness. And also, there are concerns that the carbon taxes could be enormous burden on the part of the companies as well as on the consumers. So with that at the backdrop, with regard to green economic policy, the Japanese industries and the corporate sector tend to be somewhat conservative. So such conservative stance could be a drag on the green economic policy of the government, I'm afraid. Next, let me then turn to RICO's sustainable environmental management activities. So based on the development so far and based on the progress so far, let me talk about what we're doing at RICO. In 1996, I became the president and CEO of RICO. And I highlighted 3 P's: balance, the non-regret policy, comet circle concept, and sustainable environmental management. So with these 4 pillars, I pursued RICO's sustainable environmental management. And the 3 P's balance is probably familiar to all of you. And the non-regret policy, well, when I became the president of the company, the 4th assessment report of IPCC was not yet launched. So therefore, we talked about, the fact, it was before the clear-cut presentation and announcement that this was anthropogenic climate change. But before that, RICO, I'm afraid, was very conservative in its own environmental management activities. We were somewhat reluctant. So therefore, to break out from that situation, even if it became clear that it's not anthropogenic, we should proactively address climate change and global warming. We felt that if we could do so, then we would not feel a sense of regret later on. So therefore, activities to generate profits and also activities to arrest global warming, we felt that both of these needed to be compatible in our business operations. So that's what we mean by the so-called non-regret policy. Now, when the 4th assessment report came out, we were able to deliver a more evolved form of sustainable environmental management at that stage. So we had the so-called non-regret policy and also environmental management. I think I covered earlier. A RICO company was pursuing various activities to reduce GHG, but at the same time, generate profit. That should be part of sustainable environmental management. Now, let me share with you the chart involved in the sustainable environmental management. First is this passive stage and the proactive stage and the responsible stage. Now, when we talk about environmental management, first, throughout I think protection involves various stages. But in our case, when we talk about environmental management, reduction of GHG, and also generating corporate profit will be realized at the same time. So that's what we mean by environmental management. So responding to environment means coping with external requirements such as setting of new laws and also addressing various competition taking place in the marketplace when competitors come out with new products and services. So that's what we mean by coping with external requirements. The second is to preserve the global environment. I can only use this terminology. Vision-based activities are referred to as environmental management, and also inclusive of vision. We have to pursue GHG gas reduction and also generation of profit at the same time. So realizing this at the same time means environmental management. And last but not least, let me talk about the role of Japan in the Asia-Pacific region. What about the role of the Japanese government? Initiating transition towards a green economy. I believe that is the role expected from the Japanese government. So therefore, proposing a low-carbon society model which can harmonize environmental conservation and growth. That, I believe, is the role of Japan, especially the role of the Japanese government. Then what about the role of the industrial sector and the corporate sector? As I mentioned earlier, proposing a compatible model for improving environmental conservation and corporate profits by implementation of sustainable management. We have to make conservation and profit compatible. Furthermore, if we want to build this low-carbon society, then the industrial sector must proactively be involved in this area. It is important that the industrial sector as a whole be more active in the building of low-carbon society. We must have more proactive exchange of information, R&D, and activities to make recommendations, and there is need to take action. When it comes to Japan, what about the management of the Japanese industrial sector? I'm afraid there is lack of partnerships at the management level within the Japanese industrial sector. So therefore, we need to address this. The management, who are very active in terms of global environment and low-carbon society building, well, I would say that maybe 30% of the management are very proactive. So this, if you will, the silent, we need to make sure that such silent voices become the majority going forward. So from that perspective, there are various existing business groups already in the industrial sector, but within this global network, we have many organizations that are very active in the global network today who are present here today. And CLP is one such initiative, Corporate Leaders Partnership. This is very active organization and network. We hope that such activities can be expanded even further. But at the moment, the Japan CLP has a membership of only 3 at this moment, and one happens to be the RICO company. If that is the prevailing circumstance, then how can we boast of a sense of presence? We are not in the position to offer recommendation to the government. We cannot take the leadership, and also not just in Japan, but also globally. We cannot create a network to build low-carbon society with such small membership. So therefore, it is important that Japan CLP or other organizations that may be existent, it's important that the Japanese economic sector, in particular, the top leadership, involve in partnership in order to activate activities at the industrial sector. This, I believe, is very important. And for that purpose, I hope that I would like to expand my own efforts. So with this, I would like to conclude my presentation on the perspective of the Japanese company, as well as from the perspective of the Japanese management. Low carbon society equals green growth and green economy. And I would like to thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sakurai. The CLP, Japan CLP, I have great hopes for this. I hope that you will be able to keep up your good work. Now, what you have just discussed, that the Japanese people must have a sense of crisis and that we need political leadership and we need to have responsible management of the businesses, that the top management must be conscious of the sustainability of the environment, and this is not just for Japan, but something to be shared by the whole world. So the corporate leadership, the going cross-border, and if it may have a global reach, I believe it may be hopeful for the future.
And I wish to now turn the floor to our discussants. Ladies and gentlemen, first I'd like to invite Mr. Wei Kwon-chun.
First of all, I would like to express my appreciation for the invitation and opportunity to present ESCAP's perspective on green economy and sustainable development. Actually, here, during my presentation, I would like to use green growth and green economy interchangeably, because to me, it doesn't have any difference. It's, in a way, it means the same thing. And here, my presentation will mainly focus on what is the relationship between green economy and the sustainable development. Still, in spite of the Rio Plus 20 conference last year, still many governments and countries are having some controversy about the ideas of or definition of green economy. For example, the Latin American region does not even use the word green economy. They only use sustainable development. So they reject, in a way, the word green economy itself. So, but in Asia Pacific, we are a little different situation. So I will go briefly, and I will go very quickly because of the time limit. How can I go down? Yeah. Okay. I would like to start by analyzing what is the current situation of our economic situation. I think that our current economy, where we are stuck in now, is a system based on exploiting human capital and natural capital. Human capital means people, and natural capital means nature. And by exploiting human and natural capital, we are trying to maximizing the GDP production. That is our approach, the main approach from the economic system. So it is worsening social exclusion and also lowering the resource efficiency, and also in return, it is now undermining even economic resilience and economic dynamism. So this is a very negative situation we are stuck in now. And we have to shift away from this negative cycle towards a positive cycle. Which one? Can you move on? Next slide. Yeah. Next slide. We have to move to a positive cycle, which is virtuous cycle. Go down. Next slide. Yes. So we have to invest in human capital and natural capital. So improving productivity and the social inclusion, and also improving resource efficiency, and then we can reinforce economic vitality by doing this, and then even enhancing the dynamism of the economic system. But it is easy to say, but it is in a way quite different. The critical difficulty is, how can we link investing in human and natural capital to improving, reinforcing economic vitality and economic dynamism and resilience? This is quite a challenging aspect. Yeah. And so in a way, but nevertheless, we have to shift away from exploiting to investing. And what I mean by exploiting means going by the cheapest market price based on short-term supply and demands. So the price of natural resources and the labor are decided by short-term market supply and demand. But investing means recognizing social and ecological value for the long term, which is, I should add here, long term. So basic difference between exploitation and investment is the time horizon is short term and long term. This is the basic difference. And then what is the sustainable development model should be? We should invest in human capital and pursue inclusive growth, which is, if we choose a color, it could be purple, sounds like a people, so I prefer the color purple. And but for the ecological growth, investing in natural capital and so promoting ecological growth, which we call green growth. So we have to go together in promoting inclusive growth as well as green growth at the same time. We cannot go only in pushing for green growth alone. Even though I started the green growth in ESCAP in 2005, I'm not saying that green growth is everything for the sustainable development. It is only one aspect of investing in human and natural capital. But the aspect of investing in human capital is missing here, and it has to be added. Actually, that is the reason why some of the developing country has a reservation in giving a full support for the green economy and green growth idea. So we have to recognize that the importance of investing in human capital and inclusive growth. Then, if we do that, I think we can have a genuine integration of three pillars. Investing in human capital means social inclusive, and environmental dimension and the supporting economic. So this is my vision of the social development of integrating three pillars. Then what is the role of the green economy here? I think green economy is ecological growth or ecological economy. That is something that I believe that how to position. Oh yeah, you see that, okay. Yeah, I want to say that ISAP Pacific is a pioneer of a green growth or green economy. ISAP Pacific already ISAP started the green growth in 2005. We already adopted the ministerial declaration. And by 2010, the ISAP Pacific already adopted the Astana Green Bridge Initiative. So this is even before the Rio Plus 20 meeting. And this is some chronology on how the green growth, green economy idea has evolved. So ISAP and the ISAP Pacific, in fact, already initiated in 2005, far earlier than anybody else. So I'll go very quickly. So the green economy or green growth is here to stay in spite of the many difficulties. But the problem is the green economy requires a fundamental economic system change. It's not, I don't think we can achieve a green economy with an incremental change. You need a fundamental system change. So the opportunities will depend on policy choices we are making now. But what kind of policy choices are you going to make? It is something challenging. So we have to shift away from the current growth pattern, which is resource and carbon energy intensive, towards a carbon energy and resource efficient pattern. The reason why we have to shift towards efficient pattern is because we need to sustain growth. So we need to sustain growth in order to reduce poverty. Because poverty is something many developing countries are always saying that poverty is more important than the green. So here I'm saying that green growth is a strategy of sustaining growth, which is necessary to reduce poverty. In other words, without green growth, you cannot reduce poverty, in other words. So there is no dichotomy between poverty and green. Actually, without green, you cannot reduce poverty. But the problem is it needs a fundamental economic system change. It's very difficult, which is visible in our economic low carbon green growth roadmap, which ISAP has published last year. We have defined the economic system in a visible structure and invisible structure. And invisible structure means physical, like buildings and transport. Invisible structure, which I believe is more important, is market price, fiscal policy, or technology, lifestyle, regulation. All these are visible structure, invisible structures. So we have to change this visible and invisible structures all at the same time. And the government needs to jumpstart this system change. It cannot be done by the market automatically. Market will never and can not deliver system change on its own. It needs political leadership, as was mentioned by Sakurai-san before for this. Then I'm always thinking that maybe we need on-economic thinking. What I mean by on-economic thinking, because we are still always thinking that what is the cost benefit of investment for green economy? Many of them are questioning, if I invest in natural capital, I lose money. So how can I go for green economy? That is actually based on short-term profit and the short-term time horizon. So we have to shift away from short-term, which is meaning economic, consider cost benefit, to on economic thinking, which is long-term. Otherwise, I think we cannot go forward. So there's a very important time gap. Time gap is short-term and long-term. Price gap is market price and the real price. So these are the two gaps we have to bridge. How can we do that? Actually, ISAP has already elaborated in our roadmap, but I don't have time to go for it. I just emphasize once again that because many of the developing countries are still questioning that poverty relationship and with the green growth. I'm repeating it again here that. So there's no automatic guarantee the benefit of a green growth will be evenly distributed. So we need an inclusive intervention to make the benefit of a green growth to be evenly distributed. But I have to also say that even the brown growth at the moment, we already see the widening gap of income even under current economic paradigm as well. It is not only the problem of green growth. All economic growth does not have an automatic system of even distribution. So we need a triple green partnership, as was mentioned by Sakurai-san before already. civil society has to support the political support for the government decision, because the political leaders cannot go for the green economy policies because people does not provide the political support, and they don't provide the vote for it. So politicians are only go by the votes. So civil society and the government leadership and the private sector's engagement. So this is something I want to share that. Here is our roadmap. We actually already compiled all the policy options for it, and the one information for it already in our roadmap here in our CD-ROM, and it is available on the Google. And we have already compiled actually Yokohama City as a model case for eco-city in our roadmap already. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. You've stressed the very important role of the government, and I hope maybe during the Q&A you could also elaborate on how one can accelerate decision-making by governments and action-taking by governments. It's something we really share all over the world. Now I wish to invite Ms. Tomoko Nishimoto, who has flown from Nairobi today, to join us. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Tomoko Nishimoto.
Thank you very much. I would like to also echo a similar message that was just delivered by my fellow discussant in terms of the green economy and vis-a-vis the well-being of the human being, as well as the eradication of the poverty alleviation and sustainable development. That actually we should remind ourselves when we had a Rio Plus 20 conference. Green economy was one of the two key thematic pillars of that day. And however, it was not just the green economy, it was very clearly green economy in the context of the sustainable development and poverty alleviation. And after that, Rio Plus 20, I think as the world started discussing this, the reflection of the Millennium Development Goals, which had the poverty alleviation as the goal 1, and move forward the thinking towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Not only just the eradication of the extreme poverty, the actual inequality, the distribution of the income is becoming a very important, one of the important focuses of the global discourse. So I would like to start the slide, which echoes one of the points that the fellow discussant made, Mr. Chang made, just to show the distribution of the income. The poorest, 40% of the world's population produces only 5% of the global income. And all kinds of services provided by poor people in terms of natural resource management are not being taken into account, and neither in the way in which the environmental degradation affects the poor. Not only the poor, actually the whole world community is not taken into consideration. And I think it is a very important, a very interesting picture visually, in the sense that this looks like a bit of a champagne glass with orange or red wine in it. And just by the way it looks, that you can tell that just a small push, it will collapse. So it is really not a sustainable, stable situation of the world situation. Now, what therefore, the key message is the threat to the planet and inequality. Not just the extreme poverty, but inequality itself go hand in hand. And we must find a way to the new paradigm which addresses this point. And throughout the decades, the past decades, as we heard, the green economy discussion has evolved. And at the moment, that we claim that a green economy has to be understood as mentioned before, the green and inclusive economy. The green economy is one of the, we say that green economy could be the response if and when we understood a green economy as one of the that result in increased human well-being, not just environmental well-being, and social equity, while safeguarding or significantly reducing environmental risks and ecological scarcities. And also a green economy we should understand is in the way we should understand is the economic vehicle for sustainable development. A green economy has strategies to end the persistence of poverty. It is a new economic paradigm that can drive growth of income and jobs without creating the environmental risk. But we need to challenge ourselves. Is it really? The rhetoric sounds great, but however, is it really the silver bullet to the problem that we are facing in a true to achieve the true sustainable development with all social, economic, and environmental aspects addressed in a more balanced manner? And our UNEP's Green Economy report advances or attempts to advance the argument in articulating the green economy concept and as well as the actual application of the green economy concept in many different countries. In this sense, in advancing the discussion of finding the new paradigm for the economic development. And it argues that investing or reallocating just 2% of global GDP in 10 key sectors can kickstart a transition to low-carbon, resource-efficient economy. Obviously, it has to be accompanied by a very complex and wise choice of the policy decisions. Investing also argues that investing in natural capital, resource, and energy efficiency can lead to, and this operative word here is can, it's not automatically will lead to, so can lead to, which has the a qualification in terms of a lot of policy implications, but can lead to with the right political will, a higher rate of GDP growth over time. It was pointed out that it is not a short-term gain, but it is a long-term gain that we have to bear in mind, and enhanced wealth. And it is not just the enhanced wealth of a small percentage of the population, but it is the wealth leading to the better or more balanced income distribution. Sorry. And natural capital stocks, protecting natural capital stocks and reducing poverty and creating the decent employment. And UNEP makes the use of system dynamics modeling tools to assess the impact of policies in terms of economic growth, social inclusion, job creation, and environmental sustainability. In other words, that we have the advisory services that assesses the implications of the mixture or mixed policy decisions and how it impact of true application of the green economy in addressing all these aspects. Looking at Asia as an example, I think that the audience and the participants here are more familiar with the Asia situation than I am now. But Mongolia, China, Korea, Japan, Philippines, Indonesia, I have some examples. I will not go into details at this stage because in view of the time constraint. But there are a number of very innovative and decisive policy decisions being implemented, including the most recently that in this host country, Japan, the carbon tax, which leads to the climate fund funded by the carbon tax, and the fund used to address the number of adaptation measures. Now, the challenge, I would like to just go over a few slides in terms of the challenge. As I mentioned, that green economy, green and inclusive economy is supposed to be the answer, and a lot of argument can be made. But at the same time, the challenge remains, because if we look at this, the chart, which shows that one of the main challenges in Asia is the resource efficiency of the economy. Actually, even in the countries that, well, in the region which has a number of countries are going forward green economy, the resource efficiency is not increasing. It's actually deteriorating over time. And the resource efficiency program, combined with the big growth of population, urbanization, growth of economic activity, is resulting in a projection that probably is not very optimistic for Asia region. That the tendency is not favorable to the theory that we were saying. But we believe that there is still a time to fix, time and the measures to fix this program, both resource efficiency issues as well as linking the green economy, green and inclusive economy measures to a truly sustainable development, and addressing the inequality of the income distribution, and attain the true well-being of the human being in harmony with the well-preserved and protected ecosystem and natural capital. The main question is, what kind of, I think we have skipped one slide. Can I go back to? Yes, my main question is what kind of approach we should take. As it mentioned, it is a kind of system innovation approach which has to be combined in 4 areas. I will not go into the details, but it is the one that addresses a green investment, fiscal policies, and financial instrument, well-designed financial instrument, technology improvement, as well as the change is the consumption. All these has to be come into place in order to attain what we mean actually is the result of the green and inclusive economy. The last one, it was, I will not go into detail, but the last slide is showing the challenges, 3 challenges. It is not the matter of the conceptual clarity, but it is the parallel political and substantive debate on green economy led to the various misinterpretation and precautionary negotiation positions, and compromising the conceptual clarity which still exists. It was the very same point that was mentioned after Rio plus 20. And we have to look for the ways of articulating and linking the macroeconomic impact and implications of the environmental measures. While environmental considerations have been incorporated into the various policies and plans, the macroeconomic implications are not well analyzed. And the green economy is a transformational change. It requires broad partnership, and it requires thinking going beyond GDP and actions beyond 3 pillars of the sustainable development put in silos. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nishimoto. I'm sorry that we had to rush a little bit. Thank you very much for your cooperation. And now I'd like to open to the floor the time for Q&A. And since we have not so much time, I'd like to take 2 questions. And if you can, okay, 2, the gentleman there and lady here. And could you make your statement brief and tell us who you are, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm with Nanaida Corporation. Kishima Kaisu is my name. Kishima is my name. This is to Dr. Pachauri. Well, a question to Dr. Pachauri, whom I really respect. Dr. Pachauri, I'm a Brazilian. I'm a Sansei Japanese Brazilian. I'm a Brazilian of Japanese descent. And you talked about carbon offset. I have a question about the carbon offset mechanism, if I may. So, emission trading system. It seems that it is not very successful at this moment. What are your thoughts about the lack of progress in trading, emission trading mechanism? That's my first question.
Second question together, and then ask the panel to reply, please. Sir?
Yes, my name is Volker Maufer. I'm from United Nations University Institute of Advanced Studies. I'm a senior research fellow there. I have two short questions to Dr. Pachauri. First one is, you spoke about renewable energy, and the other panelists also spoke about this. I wonder, what is the position of IPCC on our incentives for fossil fuels which still exist and which often make renewable energy less competitive? That's the first question. And the second question, in the decade of biodiversity declared by the United Nations since 2011, what is the position of IPCC with regard to climate change and its effect on biodiversity loss? There's much discussion. Is there an increase of biodiversity in some regions? Is there overall loss? Could you elaborate a little bit on this? Thank you.
Dr. Pachauri, other three questions for you.
Well, these are all very good questions. Let me respond to the first question to the lady from Brazil. Emissions trading, the clean development mechanism, joint implementation, these are actually clear opportunities under the Kyoto Protocol. But I think any one of these would function only if countries have a commitment to reduce emissions, because after all, the driver for emissions trading is the fact that countries would have commitments to reduce their emissions, and they may find it certainly more profitable, economically more attractive to see that these are implemented with due credit being given to them in other countries. Now, today, as you know, we still don't have a second commitment period for the Kyoto Protocol worked out, and therefore there is actually very little pressure on countries to get into activities like emissions trading or joint implementation or the clean development mechanism. I'm reasonably sure that if there were commitments, let's say under some new agreement, which hopefully will come into existence in 2015 to be implemented from 2020 onwards, then there might be much greater incentive for emissions trading and these kinds of offsets. So I think we are going through a situation right now where the drivers of some of these actions are not as strong as they were, let's say, a few years ago. On the question that was asked about subsidies on fossil fuels and so on, you know, in the fourth assessment report of the IPCC, we clearly stated that one of the most effective means to bring about mitigation would be to place a price on carbon. And this would clearly imply that those fuels which have a high carbon content would be priced at a much higher level than those which don't have the same level of carbon content. So I think today we have a lack of acceptance of this principle, and that's one of the reasons why renewable energy perhaps is not taking off. Not the only reason, but that's one of the reasons where you, in some sense, have a suboptimal mix in terms of renewable energy as part of the total energy picture. I might also mention that in the fourth assessment report, we did point out the fact that there is inertia in the system, inertia of various kinds. So therefore, change doesn't necessarily take place to optimize things in a reasonable period of time. On your last question about the impacts of climate change on biodiversity, I just want to mention one figure for you. We had said that with a temperature increase of 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius and above, there is a threat to 20 to 30% of the species that we assessed. There's a threat to the extinction with temperature increase of this range and above. Now, if you go above 3.5 degrees Celsius, then there are 40 to 70% of the species that we have assessed which may be under threat of extinction. So we've also highlighted the impacts on several ecosystems, biodiversity of various kinds. If you talk about marine biodiversity and marine life of various kinds, there is also the problem of ocean acidification, which is taking place on account of, increased concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases. Then that's another source of problems for various forms of life and for biodiversity. So we have clearly estimated, assessed the link between climate change and the healthy sustenance and sustainability of ecosystems, including biodiversity.
Thank you very much. Since we started a bit late, we have just a few minutes left remaining. So I would like to, call on one more person, and hopefully that the person will have a question that could be addressed to the panel. Very quickly, if you can, one more. The gentleman in the back first, and then this gentleman who is now waving his hand. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, this is for Professor Pachauri. I'm sorry, I don't have a question for the panel. But Professor Pachauri, you ended with a kind of questioning of growth with Gandhi's slide, I think at least open-ended growth. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how well or otherwise you see that thinking permeating into climate governance. Thanks.
Thank you. And this gentleman here.
Thank you. I'd like to ask in Japanese. I'm with IJS. This is a question to Mr. Sakurai. My first question to you, sir. You talked about the business sector, but to what extent our businesses are responsible in the reduction of CO2? You talked about that. You mentioned that the corporate sector is actually responsible for 90% of the CO2 emission. So that's a very lofty statement. So the business leaders who share your sentiments, how high is the percentage of such leaders in Japan? That's my first question. Second, you talked about green management. You also showed us the different phases, the stages involved in promoting green management. And I'm sure that you made various efforts, for example, having a good supply chain, and also carrying out the good branding, and also changing business model. And at the very last phase, you talk about changing the business rules. The government and the citizens must change rules that govern the company. But I think this also relates to corporate sector being 90% responsible. So to what extent are the companies ready to address this challenge? That's my question. Thank you very much. I'd like to take up your first question, sir. I mentioned that the corporate sector must be the driver and the engine. The backdrop of that is that roughly 90% of the emission involves the industrial sector. That is why. So I would say that 90% of the total emission involve the responsibility of the corporate sector. Now, this understanding, is this shared among the management within Japan? I think that was your question. I've never measured that, I'm afraid. But my message is this. Almost all the corporate management are aware of the situation, I believe. However, in the industrial sector and the corporate sector, the management tend to be conservative when it comes to the green policy. That's the area where they tend to be conservative. The green economy, the issue pertaining to the green economy, and the emission trading mechanism, and the environmental tax. So there are various economic policy components of this issue. It is in this aspect that the corporate sector and the corporate management tend to be somewhat reluctant. So my response to you is that I would say most of the management are aware of that situation. They are aware that we, the corporate sector, must be the driver and the engine of this effort. And the second, you asked about the environmental management. As far as environmental management is concerned, can the companies remain viable in the non-green economic current structure? In other words, we do not have a mechanism whereby there is cost pertaining to emissions. We do not have an emission trading mechanism that places cost on the emission. We do not yet have such a green economic structure in place. So, under those circumstances, can green and environmental management be viable? My view is that even under those circumstances, we can still be sustainable. We can still pursue sustainable environmental management and still generate profit. Once we have green economic structure in place, once we're able to price carbon emission, then I believe profit generation and environmental preservation can indeed be even more compatible at that juncture. Now, up until now, we have not yet made full transition to green economy. Now, the management perhaps may have the awareness that sustainable environmental management is not viable under the current circumstances. However, once we make transition to green economic structure, then we'll be able to generate profit for certain. Thank you.
Dr. Pachauri, would you like to comment?
Yes, a quick response. I wasn't questioning growth. All I was saying is there are various options in terms of adopting the model of growth, which on the one hand could be highly resource intensive, on the other could be very efficient in the use of resources. So I think what we really need to do is to look at all these options and evaluate them. Those patterns of growth which use resources very intensively, make negative impacts on the environment are clearly the ones that I think, given all the information we have, we shouldn't adopt. And even today, if you look at countries across the globe, you've got choices in terms of countries which have similar levels of income, but very different efficiency levels in the use of resources and the impacts on the environment. So I think what Gandhi was trying to say is that we have to evolve a very different pattern of development, which takes into account the limited resources that are available to us, and particularly for a country with a very large population. So I think the point is that we've got to exercise choices by evaluating them carefully in terms of the impacts on the natural resources of the planet and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am afraid we have to stop the Q&A at this point, but I'd like to invite Mr. Chan and Ms. Nishimoto just to make a very, very brief final message to the audience, what you really feel about this issue for Asia Pacific.
Okay, can I start first?
Yes.
Yeah. I missed to say in my presentation that the definition of green economy can be many, but my idea of definition of green economy is that green economy is an economy when you invest in natural capital and generate the profit. But unfortunately, in our current contemporary economic system, we are losing money when we are investing in natural capital. So that's why. But it needs a lot of system change. So how can we make our economy to generate the profit when we invest in, like a RICO company that have been doing or making a lot of good efforts, but it's very difficult and challenging without the system change. So it needs to be supported by the system change.
Thank you. Just to note that UNEP, on behalf of UNEP, that I'm very pleased to see that the point from different panelists here is converging in the sense that it is a transformative process that we are looking at, not just a greening economy, so to speak. Green economy is a very different paradigm, and that's the only way that we can achieve the sustainable development. And how is very hotly debated, in the global arena in the context of MDGs and the sustainable development. And I see the agenda has also, of this conference, has those areas of discussion. So I think it is a very good start that I was very pleased to be the part of this panel. Thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing more of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Pachauri and Mr. Sakurai, do you have maybe something in 30 seconds? Or
If not,
say that in this century, it's going to be crucially important to use knowledge in arriving at decisions on strategies and policies. And I think with the enormous amount of awareness and knowledge that is now available all over the world, we need to take enlightened decisions which are well informed. And I think a conference like this serves a very important purpose in meeting that objective. Thank you.
I wish to thank the panel for your presence today. It has been an honor to have you. And I wish to thank the audience for your participation today. Thank you.
Koda-sama.
Ms. Koda, Dr. Pachauri, Mr. Sakurai, Mr. Chun, Ms. Nishimoto, thank you so much. In the program, it says that we are to have a 10-minute break, but due to the scheduling, as soon as the stage is ready, we would like to just move on to the plenary session 2. Thank you.
引き続き皆様にご案内いたします。
Some housekeeping announcement.